ചിന്തകൾക്കിടയിലും ചില അശാസ്ത്രീയതയും നമ്മുടെ ജീവിതത്തിലൊക്കെ കടന്നുകൂടുന്ന ഒരു കാലഘട്ടം കൂടിയാണ്. അപ്പൊ തീർച്ചയായും സയൻസിന്റെ പ്രാധാന്യം ഉയർത്തിപ്പിടിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു സമയമാണ്. ഒരു സയന്റിഫിക് സ്പിരിറ്റ് നമ്മൾ വീണ്ടും ഉയർത്തിപ്പിടിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു ആവശ്യകതയുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ ആ ഒരു ഉദ്ദേശത്തോടു കൂടെ ശാസ്ത്ര പഠനത്തിലൂടെ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എന്തൊക്കെ അച്ചീവ് ചെയ്യാം? ആകാശത്തെ കാണിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ഇതിലുള്ള പ്രശസ്തമായ സ്ഥാപനത്തിൽ എഡ്യൂക്കേറ്റഡ് ആവാൻ ഭാഗ്യം ലഭിച്ചിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വ്യക്തിയാണ്. ബാംഗ്ലൂർ ഇന്ത്യൻ ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂട്ട് ഓഫ് സയൻസ്, അതുപോലെ IIT തുടങ്ങിയ വളരെ ക്രീമി ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷൻസിലാണ് അദ്ദേഹം എഡ്യൂക്കേറ്റഡ് ആയിരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ തീർച്ചയായും നിങ്ങളിലേക്ക് ഒരുപാട് സാധ്യതകൾ പറഞ്ഞു തരാനൊക്കെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് കഴിയും. അപ്പൊ അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ കുട്ടികളോട് പറയാനുള്ളത്, ഈ ഒരു സെഷൻ വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ട് തന്നെ നിങ്ങൾ കേട്ടിരിക്കുക, വളരെ താല്പര്യത്തോടെ കേട്ട് ശ്രദ്ധിക്കുക. എവിടെയൊക്കെ ഈ ബിരുദ പഠനത്തിന് ശേഷം നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എവിടെയൊക്കെ എത്തിച്ചേരാം എന്നുള്ളതിനെ കുറിച്ച് നല്ലൊരു ഇൻഫർമേഷൻ കളക്ട് ചെയ്യാം. അപ്പോൾ ഇത്രേ ഒരു തുടക്കം എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ പറയുന്നുള്ളൂ. അപ്പോൾ പേരന്റ് ടീച്ചേഴ്സ് അസോസിയേഷന് വേണ്ടി എല്ലാവരെയും പൊതുവായി ഇത് സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ സ്വാഗതം ഫോർമലി വെൽക്കം സ്പീച്ചിന് വേണ്ടി മാത്തമാറ്റിക്സ് ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ് ഹെഡ് ഓഫ് ദ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഡോക്ടർ ഷാവുൽ സാറിനെ ക്ഷണിക്കുന്നു. താങ്ക് യു ഓൾ.
Good morning to all of you. I'm happy to welcome you all to this induction program. Let me ask, am I audible?
Yes, sir, yes.
Organized by the Department of Chemistry, Department of Physics, and Department of Mathematics, and funded by our college PTA. All the students have joined to learn what we call it as science. Either it is mathematics, physics, all.
Shaul sir?
Yes, please.
Shall I mute all of them, because some people are talking? Let me mute and you can come back.
Okay, just do it at your end.
Yes. Yes, you can unmute now. Please.
Okay. So in a sense, you have all chosen a subject of your interest, and in this day, you will be lucky to have a well-known speaker, Dr. Jiten Vacheri, who will be taking you to explore various possibilities, as has already been mentioned by Dr. Narayanan, PTA Secretary. All the subjects which come under the umbrella of science are going under tremendous changes. New scientific knowledge is added in every minute by hectic researches taking place all over the world. Whether it is in physics or in chemistry or in mathematics, people are looking for bettering the lives of human beings. New knowledge areas like nanoscience, artificial intelligence, thanks to the advent of computer science, and many other branches, genetic engineering, so many things are coming up just to take all of us ahead to lead a good life. So the future is for you. And the topic today selected for you to listen a talk by Dr. Jitin is actually science for future. So the future is bright if you look at it in a positive way. So to make your mindset a positive one, to orient it properly, this day's program will be a helpful one. I formally welcome our college principal, Dr. Fatima Evi, to chair the session. And I welcome our chief guest, Dr. Jitin Vacheri, who will be addressing you on different areas of science, science in the past, science in the present, and science in the future. So I welcome him on behalf of the college and for the PTA to this program. I also welcome all the participants to this program, and I now request our principal to give or to deliver the presidential address. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, Shahul sir. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Shahul, the chief guest of and the speaker of the day, Dr. Jitin, Dr. Sahir, who's going to introduce the chief guest, Dr. Narayanan, the PTA secretary, all the HODs of the various science departments, my colleagues, and dear students. As Dr. Shahul mentioned, the college PTA, every year the college PTA conducts induction programs for our new entrants. That is our first year students who enter into the college system. As students who are poised on the verge of massive change, because you are shifting from college to school to college. And it is a shift which is in many ways fun, but it is also radical and demanding. So this is the first of a series. We conduct every year, we conduct a series of induction, one single induction program, which would incorporate or which would gather together all the young eager faces of first year students. But this year, unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, pandemic situation, we will not be able to physically see you all, but it also brings its own opportunities. But for that opportunity, but for the shift from physical to online mode, we wouldn't have been fortunate enough to have one of the most eminently qualified and accomplished young scholar who is obviously shining, who has had a very shining, stellar career, which shows what kind of hard work, determination, and focus he must have put into his studies, his academics, as well as his career. Dr. Jitin Vacheri currently is a postdoctoral fellow at the prestigious National University of Singapore. And he has come a long way coming through premier institutes of India as well. And we all know that National University of Singapore is one of the best rated institutions in the world. So a more formal, elaborate introduction is going to be provided by Dr. Sahir. And Dr. Jitin personifies for me, we are fortunate to have him precisely because he personifies all that a future in science could bring to all of you. That is, if you set your goals right and follow those dreams. And I have no doubt that he is indeed the right choice, the right person to inspire you further, to discover your own great potential and reach your greatest potential, and also find ways to chart promising directions in science. I'm honored to invite Dr. Jitin Vacheri to deliver his talk and request Dr. Jitin to do us the honor today. Sir. Before we proceed, I also request Dr. Sahir to give an introduction about our chief guest.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So, a warm welcome to one and all. Let me, in a few words, let me introduce my friend, Dr. Jitin. So he is currently a postdoctoral research fellow of National University of Singapore. And he did a PhD from IIT Madras, where we were together for a couple of years there. He did his master's from IISc Bangalore, and putting his career in more detail, Dr. Jitin Vacheri, he took his MTech in computer science and engineering from the Indian Institute of Science, one of the premier institute in our nation, and one of the best institute in the world. After his master's, he did his PhD from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and he got a postdoctoral research fellowship at one of the premier institute in the world, National University of Singapore. He is doing his postdoctoral research in the field of computer science. And he has many international publications in his field. He previously worked as a software engineer, and he bagged many awards and scholarships. One among them is he got All India rank number 2. He was the second rank in the GATE examination held in 2019 with a percentile score of 99.99. So I think this is his short introduction. I think we are all eager to watch his talk. So I'm not going in detail. This is his concise details about Dr. Jitin Vacheri, and I think now we can begin his session. Dr. Jitin.
Yeah, so shall I share my screen?
Yeah, yes, just a minute. Your co-host, right?
So is my screen visible now?
Yes.
And I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. So thanks for the invitation. I'm sure I don't deserve all the credit which has been given to me, and I'm surely not authority to give a talk on this subject. But still, given that I'm invited, and let's see what kind of justice I can do to that. And just to set things straight, I'm a result of a sequence of fortunate accidents which happened in my life. So without which I wouldn't be here. So I would actually call them fortunate accidents, given the fact that, say many things like my father was a central government employee, so he would always get transferred. So had it not been the case that he was transferred to Kerala when I was in class 9, I would not have taken the Kerala entrance exam because I was never interested in engineering per se. Same is the case with the fact that I was not enjoying my job. I would not have taken the GATE exam. I would not have got my MTech if not for that. And and if I had not got into IISc, I would never have done PhD. So just to put in perspective that I'm not a result of my hard work. It's a result of a sequence of fortunate accidents which happened in my life. So just before I start off, I would just add a disclaimer that given that I'm from computer science department, most of my examples and exposure are from that perspective. So I do understand that the audience is from a science background or future science students. So I would try as much to not connect myself with computer science, but still, the thing which I'm passionate about and what I understand more is computer science. So you would see that it keeps cropping up, regardless. So yeah. So let's just dive in. So what is science? So this is the dictionary definition of science. So science is intellectual, practical activity encompassing systemic study of the structure and behavior of physical and natural world through the observation and experiment. I'm sure none of you understood anything, in the sense that this is not the science which you are here for. This is not the science for which I have a deep sense of love in me, or this is not the science which I would want you to pursue. So what is science, right? Or what is a scientist? So I would, keep interchanging between science, scientist, or a researcher. All of them, encompass the same meaning. So essentially, what is science? Science is fooling around. A scientist is essentially a kid who never grew up. The curiosity is still there. So if you look at a ideal scientist, is essentially an ideal kid. So what is ideal kid? A kid who fools around, who doesn't mind taking risk, who always breaks things, who always keeps asking questions like why, where, how, when, and questions never stop. So that is a pure scientist, or the ideal scientist, the person who fools around. For him, nothing stops him from exploring things. For example, he would want to know what would happen if I were to sleep on a bed of nails. What is the limit of me sleeping on the bed of nails? He would want to know, can I touch electricity? Is it a thing which I can touch? Like what are the limits to doing that? Can I play with fire? Like, can I blow up the fire? Or you would also want to know what the lightning is. So for example, here what you see is a Tesla charged electric bolt, where the voltage is somewhere around 3 million volts. I mean, 3 million, it's 10 to the power of 6. So these are the kind of things which a scientist is doing now. These are toys of the scientist. These are tools of a scientist. Essentially, a scientist is someone who's fooling around his entire life, and he's being paid for it. Scientist is curious. Scientist is always asking for questions. Most of the questions which are stupid in nature, stupid for the normal person, but no question is stupid. So essentially, with the picture I'm trying to present here is what is science. So before you even delve into the career options, or even start looking at what your courses should be, or what kind of effort you should put in, you should appreciate the fact that science is not a career option. Science is not a source of job. Science is essentially reality. Science is essentially without which you can't live. Science is essentially something which is always around you. So that is the point I'm trying to bring out in this talk. Hopefully I'll try my best. So a scientist is always looking for questions, and no question is stupid. So he might ask, like, what is the color of sky? Or does the sky have a color? And like, why is sky blue? Why is sky orange? Why is sky red? What is that is happening? Like, what is with this color? He might ask, like, why do I sleep so much? Like, why do I sleep 33% of my life? I mean, can I not sleep? Is there life beyond Earth? And he might even ask something very profound, like, can I stop war? So these are the kinds of questions which a person or a scientist is looking at. It could be for fun. It could be for real profound impact, like a war, or it could be just curiosity. I mean, I don't care what it is. I am interested in knowing it. So what I'm trying to say is, like, science is not a collection of information. You're not given an encyclopedia to mug up. So I'm not sure how you have been exposed to education in your school, but at least in my childhood, what would happen is that science is a collection of information, right? I mean, you know a lot of things. You know the speed of light. You know the speed of the acceleration due to gravity. You know the value of Planck's constant. You know all these numbers. Or if it's maths, you know lots of equations. You know how to solve it. But there is no connections given to it. So one of the very good accidents which happened in my life was that for some reason I only like Discovery Channel and National Geographic. So Cartoon Network also, yes, but then these were the only 3 channels I would watch. So what happened with my exposure with Discovery Channel and National Geographic is that everything was romanticized. So what do I mean by romanticized? Say, for instance, if you're watching, say, David Attenborough, you actually see him enjoying his life, going to forests, looking at animals, playing with them. His entire perspective, his entire worldview is different. It's entirely different from your worldview, how you perceive things, right? For him, science is not a collection of information. He's not giving you numbers. He's not giving you facts, right? He's giving you a story. He's narrating it. When he shows a lizard escaping a group of snakes, he's actually narrating the story to you. And that is what science is. Science is looking for stories, looking for inspirational things, which obviously find application in our life, which are very useful. But then, the beauty is in the question itself, asking the questions and finding the path to the answer. Answer may not be the final destination. You obviously go beyond it, but then the very point that you're able to ask questions is amazing. So, I mean, that's why, kids ask a lot of questions. I mean, they are the best people. They always are inquisitive. For them, everything is new. Everything is from a different perspective. So what a kid is, so kid is essentially playing games, right? I mean, he's exploring things all the time. So what is a scientist? So scientist is, as the previous definition of science had indicated to, is exploring the real world, right? He's looking at the nature itself. The language of nature is science. The way the nature is trying to speak to you is through science. The universe is constantly speaking to you. It's like a FM radio signal. The signal is always there in the atmosphere. If you tune yourself, if you have a radio, you listen to it. You have the music, you're listening to the music. Otherwise, there is no music. I mean, it's all noise if you can't tune it. So science is a tool through which you can actually play a game with the universe. You can actually, so it's a game of hide and seek. The universe is always hiding things from you, and you are trying to explore and find it. So a scientist gets a kick out of revealing a secret of nature. With every secret being revealed, there are 1,000 more questions which are put in front of you. So it is a ever evolving, a constant game. And philosophically speaking, also there is many theorems like Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which essentially says that human can never achieve absolute knowledge, in the sense that human will always have enough knowledge, enough unknowns to explore, and he would continuously do that. So the point is, the game is never ending. So the only people who are playing this game are the scientists, or the people who are in the field of science. So what is this game like, right? So for example, E is equal to mc squared. So what is it? So as I said, the language of nature is, or the universe is science, and the language of science itself is maths. So E is equal to mc squared is just an equation, but then it connects mass, energy, and the speed of light. It is an equation. So the universe is trying to tell you something, and through this equation. So it is one of the most famous equations, obviously, and it's a profound equation, but it reveals a lot of information to you. So that's what this equation captures. So the beauty of this equation is the communication it has, the things it is trying to communicate to you. Or is something as trivial as an apple falling. So for us, it is apple falling. For Newton, it was not apple falling. For him, it was a question, why? For which, from which he had the entire theory of gravity, I mean, Newtonian gravity coming up. And so the point I'm trying to make is that if you're ready to play, the universe is ready to reciprocate. Universe always has enough games for you. It is just, it is our bandwidth and our limitations that we are not able to explore everything. So just as a side note, the discovery of, I can't say discovery of gravity, but still, the Newton's discovery of gravity happened when he was in his home from a break because of plague. So there was a plague outbreak in London, and his college, Trinity College in Cambridge, was closed. So he was home because of a pandemic or an epidemic, whatever it is of that time. So you are, in his position in some sense. But then he was using that time to explore the universe or play with the universe. We should also do the same. And something of similar sort is the double helix structure of DNA. So, I cannot emphasize more like how important this discovery was. The entire perspective change which it brought in biology, and the entire new fields it opened up. So again, it was always there. It was not as if DNA were hiding from humans, right? But then we never had the tools to explore it or to understand it. It took a generation of scientists to reach to this knowledge, and with this knowledge, the understanding we have, the knowledge we have, is totally different. For instance, now we speak in the language of DNA. So that is also one extra language which came into our repertoire of tools, right? So a scientist is someone who's fooling around, who is always playing a game with the universe. So obviously, if you're playing with the universe, your playground is the universe itself, right? So, for instance, we know most of you would recognize what this image is. This is Large Hadron Collider. This is arguably one of the biggest experiments and one of the biggest equipment ever made by human. It has a collaboration of more than 100 countries. It has more than 10,000 scientists working on it. The whole tunnel itself is 27 kilometers, and it spans across 2 or 3 countries. And it is at the depth of 175 meters. So this is the scale of science. I mean, this is just one of the tools. I mean, we could eventually, within a few hundred years, we will be we will be a spacefaring race. We will be going to multiple planets. We will be, hopefully conquering the universe. So our playground is not restricted to Earth. We are not meant to be remaining in Earth. I mean, we are meant for something much more, and humans can always do that. Or something like, for instance, this is the experiment which was conducted to, verify Einstein's general theory of relativity. This experiment was done in somewhere in 1919. So this was like just immediately after the First World War, and this experiment spanned across the globe. I mean, 2 different locations, which were one somewhere around Africa and one somewhere around Argentina, I guess. And so the point I'm trying to make is, like, once your questions are large, once your scope is large, it's the universe itself which you are playing with. The playground is universe. So you're no longer restricted to your experiments where you're playing with the textually, playing at the scale of the Earth itself. Now all our observations, for instance, be it for climate change, be it for epidemiological study, everything is on a global scale. And who does it? It is a scientist who does it. So again, we have the scope of expanding our playground beyond our immediate vicinity and going to the entire universe, potentially to the entire universe. So above all, I mean, what makes me fall in love with science, right? It is the beauty. And when I say beauty, it's I mean, it's a very personal thing, right? Obviously. So beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, I can't say that I'm like, I was born to be a scientist, or, the moment I saw something in it, I started appreciating it. It never happened like that. So one of the beautiful things about science is that it is a taste which can be acquired. So what do I mean by acquired taste? I mean, for instance, as a child, I used to enjoy sugar a lot. So obviously, if I drink tea or coffee, I used to have it with sugar. But off lately, I stopped having sugar. And now I appreciate the taste of coffee without sugar. And if I were to have coffee with sugar, I don't like it, in the sense that I feel the taste of coffee is lost. So the point I'm trying to make is that as I was able to acquire the taste of coffee, as I was able to appreciate its bitterness, same is the case with science. I mean, there's this inherent beauty to it. Like I cannot, make you appreciate it. I cannot make you look at it in a beautiful perspective, but it is a perspective which you have to learn. So how do I like, so I'll explain it through a series of examples, which actually made me appreciate science. So historically speaking, we know the famous case of Archimedes shouting out "Eureka!" or "I have it." So essentially, the problem he was trying to solve is, the king was gifted with a crown made of pure gold, and the king doubted whether it was pure gold or not. I mean, he was not sure. So the only way to test it at that time was to melt it and test the purity of gold. But he didn't want to melt it. He liked the crown very much. So Archimedes was the chief scientist for the king. So Archimedes was asked, like, can you test? So it took him a lot of time. I mean, he didn't want to melt it. He didn't know how to test it, right? So during a bath, when his bathtub was filled and he entered the water, obviously the water spilled out. That's when he observed that the amount of water which spilled out was proportional to his volume, and his volume is proportional to his density, right? I mean, this was an aha moment. I mean, there's literally a technical term called aha moment, a moment when, you know, things actually open up to you and everything falls in place. I mean, it's you have to experience it for you to actually, you know, appreciate it. It need not be an invention or a discovery. It could be just a new perspective which opens up to you. So the moment he realized that now he has this a beautiful tool to, you know, measure the actual density and everything of this. I mean, you can't measure the volume of a crown, right? If you think of it, we know the formula for measuring the volume of a sphere. We know the volume of, you know, all these well behaving shapes like cuboids or cylinders or things like that. But we can't measure, you know, volume of arbitrary object. So now he had a means of measuring the volume of arbitrary object by displacing it through water. I mean, this was the basis of Bernoulli's principle, and, you know, and we know what happened after that. And as they say, the rest is history. So this was one of his aha moments. I mean, and he was not, you know, a small guy, in the sense that he's the chief scientist of the king. I mean, he was Greek, so Greeks were the people at the forefront of technology at that time. He's the one who said, give me the long enough lever and a place to stand, and I can tilt the earth. So his scientific background is pretty strong. But then if you think of it, this discovery by itself is very small, in the sense that he only found a way of measuring the volume of crown without melting it, right? Without converting it into a volume, a cylinder or a sphere. I mean, he just found very simple thing. But then the connections he made and the Bernoulli's principle which came out, that the buoyancy which came out, that is what the connection is. I mean, that's where he got this aha moment. So same is the case with, you know, Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is a concept in game theory, in which, so again, I mean, I cannot explain it completely to you, but then it suffices to explain that many interactions in our life can be modeled as a game. So game is not a game you play with, you know, opponents, but a game is a mathematical modeling in which you have participants and you have rules of engagement. So it could be a game to win, or it could be a game to just play, you know, where you are engaging to make transactions or whatsoever. So the insight which Nash had in one of his works was, so people generally are selfish. So he was trying to model economics, you know. So from a capitalistic perspective, the idea till his discovery or invention was that as long as people are selfish and they try to selfishly, you know, increase their output, the economy as a whole or the country as a whole will always improve. So what they fail to realize is that this could be suboptimal. So what do I mean by suboptimal? It might be very good for that individual. Say, for instance, a businessman who's very selfish and he kills all his competition. It might be very good for him, but it might not be good for the country as a whole. So he mathematically proved that there are solutions to many problems of this sort, in which if individuals were to take a suboptimal strategy, in the sense that they are not maximizing their own reward, the economy as a whole can maximize its reward. So which was very counterintuitive, in the sense that now you are required by the rules of the game that you do not maximize your reward. For instance, you always try to maximize reward for the entire society, which became the basis for, you know, lots of economic theory which came afterwards. I mean, he got a Nobel Prize for that. And so, I mean, this again was the aha moment for him. He could not sleep. He had to finish his thesis, and I mean, he finished his thesis, and the rest is history, as they say. Another beautiful example is that of infinity. So infinity, I'm sure you guys will learn it in your real analysis subject. So even I didn't know what infinity was till my MTech. So that's when I did my real analysis course. So everyone who aspires to do a PhD was required to do this course called real analysis in IISc. And this course is arguably, one of the best courses I have ever done. It totally changed my perspective towards maths, and I actually understood what maths is through this course. So Cantor was essentially a mathematician, German mathematician, who was looking at, how to measure the size of a set, right? So, and he came up with this crazy notion that infinity is obviously not a number, but then infinity is not the limit of a size or a number, in the sense that there are infinities, say infinity 1 and infinity 2, such that infinity 2 is larger than infinity 1. So, I mean, this is so counterintuitive and so vague in some sense that the mathematicians of his time rejected his work. Most of the times his papers never get published, his books never get published, he didn't get academic positions. He struggled a lot in his entire life. I mean, his most of the recognition which came to him came after his death. But then the point is, that was his aha moment, in the sense that the realization that infinity is not one point. I mean, if for ease of communication, and let me call it a number, though it is not a number, infinity is not a number, rather there are multiple infinities. He even went on to prove that there are actually infinities. I'm sure all this sounds vague and stupid, but then the point is, the impact of his work is so profound that, as I said, the language of science is the language of universe is science, the language of science is mathematics, and the language of mathematics is set theory. That is the one which Cantor created, set theory. And set theory happens to be the one which argues about infinities and infinities. And so mastering set theory is the first step to mastering maths. And mastering maths is arguably the first step to mastering science. So again, it was a very small invention or discovery if you look at the complexity of it, in the sense that it doesn't, it's not like a Large Hadron Collider where you had to invest billions of dollars, or it's not a work which involved hundreds of years of work. It was just a thought which he had, but then that was his aha moment. So the point I'm trying to make is that you have to experience your aha moment. So if I were to explain one of my aha moments, again, this was not my invention or discovery, it was just a realization. So all of you are aware of the quantum leap which is being made in the area of artificial intelligence. So given that I'm a computer science guy, so I can be much more technical about it, in the sense that when they say artificial intelligence, they mean a particular kind of model which is called a deep learning model, which is neural networks. So essentially it is a network of something called as neurons, and they have interconnections between them. So what happens is that in machine learning or any artificial intelligence task, you are essentially modeling your problem as a mathematical function. Okay, so that is in the simplest, one of the simplest way of describing what machine learning or artificial intelligence is. So you have a problem for which you don't know what the equation is, so you have to model it as a mathematical equation. So what happens is that based on your model and based on your problems, there are quite lots of equations which can be modeled. So you would assume that something is a straight line, something is a sine curve, and then you are trying to fit it. And neural networks, on the contrary, try to fit it with a function called a step function. Step functions are arguably one of the simplest functions in mathematics, which says that, if the value is between this range, it takes a value 1. If not, it is 0. So it actually looks like a step, the function itself looks like a step. Now, the beauty of all this comes from this beautiful theorem called universal approximation theorem. Okay, it's a very benign looking theorem. So I'm sure you guys have learned something called as limits. For example, what is the limit of x tends to 0 sine x by x? So this is a limit of a function or a limit of a variable. You can also do limits of a sequence of functions, in the sense that you have a function 1, function 2, function 3. What happens when function infinity happens? What is the behavior of this function? Okay, so universal approximation theorem says that given any function, it doesn't matter what is the function, just give me any function, I can create a sequence of step functions which will reproduce the same result as this function. So what it essentially says is that you give me any complex function, don't tell me what the equations are, don't tell me what the parameter is. I would eventually, give me infinite time, I can find a step function which gives you the same output. So what happens is, like, given an input, you produce the output through your function, you produce the output through your step function, the outputs would be the same. So I cannot distinguish who was who. So now you plug it into machine learning. So machine learning essentially is trying to learn a function for your problem. And again, universal approximation theorem says that I can create a series of step functions which will reproduce this function. Now, what does neural network do, which is the AI or deep learning which we are talking about? It actually creates a series of step functions, and it is very simple. The mathematics is very simple. The programming is hopelessly simple. It is amazing, like how simple it is. It is advancement in current computing technologies that it enabled us to actually create something of this scale. And when you say limit n tends to infinity, it actually has to go to infinity, right? So now how do you do all these operations in a short time? So the point is, once you realize that you have reached the end game of your programming. So by end game, what do I mean? Now you actually do not need any other modeling. You can do everything with deep learning. So that was like my aha moment. I could see the entire connection, when Sir was taking a deep learning class, and you could see that, he said, this approximates a step function, and step function has universal approximation theorem, and you can approximate any function. I knew that, the field has ended in the sense, in a good way, in the sense that, you have actually achieved the unachievable, in the sense that you got the best function output. So again, I don't expect you to, appreciate what I appreciated, just because it took me 10 years to appreciate it. So it took me my entire BTech, it took me my entire MTech, and a half of my PhD to, actually see that, whoa, I learned all this, and this is the culmination of it. And that is the beauty of deep learning. So how it works and all that is, obviously there are lots of, things which happen. So that is where, the point I'm trying to make is, like, the inspiration for science has to come. You have to find your aha moment. I'm not asking you to find it, but the very point that you get exposed to so much of information, so much of beauty, and romanticize that. See things beyond information, see things beyond a piece of text in your textbook, and try to connect it to the universe, try to play with it, try to interconnect all the things which you have learned, try to connect your chemistry, your physics, your maths, your bio, and that's when, the beauty comes in. So all these great scientists, they are never restricted to their own field. They know lots of other fields also. It is most of the times interdisciplinary. For example, Leonardo da Vinci, we know him as a painter, but then he was one of the greatest scientists. He was one of the greatest sculptor. He was one of the greatest engineer. He was a defense engineer. He was architect, and he was a futurist. He did lots of things. He was totally exploring everything which he can lay his hand on. So that is the beauty of science, in the sense that you get to see and explore things which are beyond you in some sense, and it gives you a perspective. I've heard people say, you know, when you stand at the edge of Niagara, I mean, it's a life-changing experience. Or say if you go to Argentina, arguably one of the darkest places. By dark, I mean at night you can actually see the sky and you can actually see the Milky Way, the limits of Milky Way. People say it's life-altering, you know. So I have never had life-altering experiences as far as natural beauty is concerned. I mean, beauty in terms of artistic beauty, but I have had my life-changing experience as far as science is concerned. So again, it was a great fortune to be in IISc. So there I have worked with computers which have 4 terabytes of RAM. So just imagine, I have my laptop which has a RAM of 4 GB and I'm connecting to a server which has a RAM of 4 terabytes. You can do anything with it, essentially, right? I have seen brain cells, literally cells being poked with a needle so that they can study the electrical signals in it. And it was alive, you know, the cell was alive. The signals were actually flowing through it. And I have touched liquid nitrogen. The first time you touch liquid nitrogen, which is, I guess, minus 150 degrees Celsius, it's like, you know, it's just amazing, you know, like I touched liquid nitrogen. I happened to visit a nanotech lab where my friend was working with a temperature of 1 millikelvin. Millikelvin is 10 to the power of minus 3 Kelvin. So that's somewhere around minus 272 degrees Celsius. I mean, it completely blows your mind off, you know, like what is happening? Like, this is science, you know, that's where you get a feeling that I want to do it. You know, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, you know. In NUS, for instance, there's this bus which goes around, which is a self-driving bus. There are no drivers. You just enter it and it follows the path. So once you know, see it from a perspective of a scientist or an engineer, for me, many a times it is the perspective of engineer, because I appreciate how difficult, you know, making those things are, and I want to understand how they did it. So speaking of perspective, I have to, you know, share the experience of one of my roommates, 2 of my roommates. So as it happened, once a frog entered our house, and both of them were staring at it for a long time and unable to decide what to do. Right, it's a frog. We are guys. We are, you know, undergrads. We should be able to handle it, but they could not decide it. So without naming them, let's call them Munir and Rashid. And Munir was like, you know, Rashid, it's so beautiful, you know. It's an amazing creature. Just look at it, how shiny it is. It hops so much. It is a beautiful creation. And Rashid was like shocked at what Munir said. I mean, oh, that's what you see. I was looking at a pest and thinking of how to throw it out. Should I kill it or should I throw it? And, you know, this is perspective. And one of them is a data scientist now, and one of them is a mechanical engineer. I need not tell you who is who. So the perspective of how you look at things totally changes at how you handle them, what you gather from it. So yeah, so this is science. So science is, you know, I would say, for me at least, it's an intersection of love. It is an intersection of what I am arguably good at. It is an intersection of what the world needs, and it is at the intersection of what I'm paid for. So this is what Ikigai is, in the sense that now I don't have to work for my entire life. What I do is what I'm passionate about, what my profession is, and what I'm paid for, right? So you can enjoy it. So the point I'm trying to again emphasize here is that, you know, the beauty of science, the appreciation for science, and the passion for science is not something which needs to be innate in you. You don't need to be born with it, you know. It is your ability to connect it with the universe. It's your ability to look at the world in a different perspective, right? Once you start doing it, you cannot undo it, in the sense that now the way I perceive the world, now the way I talk to people, I listen to them, I try to understand them, it's totally different from what I was say even before 2005. 2005 is when I graduated. So the point is, you are in a place for your undergrad studies where, arguably you're going to, this is your first step into science. And so what I would want to implore you and request you to is not learn it, but to experience it, experience science, enjoy it, try to understand where it connects to. Passing exams is not important, in the sense that many times people ask me, like, how did I get my rank? So did I study a lot? The point is, like, I never studied a lot, but I enjoyed it a lot, in the sense that, say, computer science, again, I cannot so that's my field, so that's where I can connect. So one of the beauties of computer science is that it is a subset, it is a field derived from mathematics. So as a result, what happens is that most of the things are conceptual, in the sense that they are in your head, right? Most of these algorithms are things called as data structures, or logic. So even Cantor set and real analysis, integration, differentiation, linear algebra, all of those are conceptual things, right? So I was lucky enough to have a few teachers who were philosophical in nature, who would try to communicate the perspective behind it. Once you get the whole idea of the subject, right, then you don't have to learn the subject. So for instance, like, what would happen, say, when I see a new paper or a new research or a new data structure or anything new in computer science, what happens is, like, there is very little to learn from it, because the very moment a concept is mentioned, you get an entire perspective of what it could be and what it will be like, in the sense that you stand in the shoes of the scientist who has developed it. You already are in that, you get that worldview from him, and you just have to get the nitty-gritties or fine details from that person. So reaching that state is only possible if you start enjoying your subject, and enjoying the subject is only possible if you try to understand it from a larger perspective, in the sense that finer details of E equal to mc square and the theorem and the proof is, I'm sure it is very important, but then your ability to connect it with the universe and the thing with mass, energy, and the speed of light, and how it profoundly impacts so many other things, is what is more important, I would argue, than the proof itself. Proof is important, but then your ability to look at the proof beyond the mathematical steps and go look at it as a story is what is more important, I would argue. So yeah, so this was the intro, or the trailer for what science is. It is amazing and beautiful, but then it is not something which comes for free, right? Archimedes dedicated his entire life, be it Galileo, be it any scientist you name of, they have had an immense amount of personal tragedy and personal sacrifices to get what they have got. So if I'm not wrong, Einstein has had 3 marriages, none of them successful, I guess. And I'm not saying like science is only tragedy, but the point I'm trying to emphasize is that it is not free. You have to put in your efforts. So essentially, you are being, invited into a fraternity of scientists, right? You are learning science, so you are being invited into the fraternity of scientists. And who are scientists? Scientists are the guardians of the galaxy, right? So I'm not being cheesy or anything when I say they are the guardians of galaxy, or I'm not being pretentious or claiming that I'm the best or anything like that. But this is the fact. I mean, I would argue how it is. This is the fact. I mean, you cannot live without scientists. The galaxy doesn't exist in the sense that obviously the galaxy exists, but then it doesn't exist for humans without the scientists. Scientists are the one who connect humanity to the galaxy in a mutually symbiotic way, in the sense that you have to explore and exploit the galaxy and survive the galaxy also, right? The universe is constantly conspiring against you. For instance, the COVID, when COVID happened, essentially universe is trying to kill all of us. It is the scientist who has to prevent it from happening. Or when say comet or a asteroid comes to hit Earth, it is the scientist who has to prevent it, or anything, right? Be it food scarcity or global poverty, economic crisis, anything has to be handled by the scientist. It is not the army which is going to protect you, right? Armies protect you against another army, but no one protects you against the universe but the scientist. So now you are going to join this community. So no one gets to become a commando or a Navy SEAL just because he wants to, right? I mean, you have to prove your mettle. So arguably that's what you are here for. So welcome to the gang, if I can invite you, welcome you. So yeah, so far what we saw is Ronaldo. We know Ronaldo, we like the way he plays, he's amazing, he's talented, everything is beautiful about him, but we never saw his training. He, as a child, he worked his backside off, training every time. People who know him tell that even now he's the first person who comes for the training sessions, and he's the last person to leave the training session. So I personally love Ronaldo more than Messi, just because Messi obviously has worked out a lot, but then he has a lot of inherent talent in him. Ronaldo is not a guy of talent in the sense, yes, he's talented. In comparison to Messi, he's not talented. He's a man of sheer hard work. So you are also required to work a lot, because the position you're aspiring for is to be the guardians of the galaxy. It's not a mean task, it's not a small position. I mean, it's not your exams, it's not your university exams or the marks you score. You are going to decide the fate of the universe, you're going to decide the fate of humanity itself, and of course the fate of Earth. I mean, we can screw it up like with global warming, or we can make it a very good world. So what is science? Again, so till now it was all trailer, but then if you think of it, what is science? Science is pure. So what do I mean by pure, right? It is a place which is driven by the pursuit of truth. So we are not here to create a propaganda or to create a perspective. We are not here to win an election. We are not here to drive our own agenda, but we are here only to discover the truth and how to use it and control it, obviously. So this is an amazing position to be, in the sense that the very fact that you're looking at only truth means that you don't look at authorities. So what do I mean by authorities is that, for instance, if in our case, say the prime minister says something, it is the prime minister who said that, and then that's it. No one can question it, or be the chief minister, or be the leader of your institute, or anything. So you associate an authority or with a position. Science does not appreciate position. Science only looks at truth. So what I mean by that, say for instance, when initially quantum physics was being proposed, Einstein found objections to it. I mean, he was never convinced that this works. But then no one cared about what Einstein thinks, because all people cared about is what is the truth, what is the fact. And truth and facts are in the equations and the proofs and the papers which come out. Just because Einstein feels that it doesn't work doesn't mean that it works. If I can demonstrate it, if I can experiment it, if I can produce it, it is amazing, Then you have the proof there. I mean, no one, just because it's Einstein who's saying it doesn't mean it is right or wrong. Correctness and falseness of a concept only depends on the proof which is provided. So it is pure in that sense. No one can adulterate it. Say, for instance, Nazis, they had a group of lots of scientists with them, and they always wanted to prove that Aryan race is the most superior race. They are the perfect ones. They have to clean up all the impurity in all other races. That was not the truth. And as it happens, the truth always prevails. And it had to, Nazis had to go. I mean, apart from the historic context of how Nazis went, even scientifically, it is not it is not a theory or a concept which can be perpetualized just because it is false. So what happens with falsehood is that, the general structure of science is that you have theories, you have axioms, and then you have lots of experiments and deductions from them, right? If your axiom or a theory is wrong, everything that you deduce from it is wrong. And all the decisions which you make based on your deductions is obviously again wrong. So what would happen is that even if you falsify anything in your science, which happens many a times, scientists are humans, there are many corrupt scientists, and they produce false results. For instance, there was this paper which said that vaccination causes autism. It was a false paper. It was rejected later on, yes, but then initially it was not rejected. It took some time for it to get rejected. The point is, it will get rejected. Science is so pure that no one, like I cannot adulterate it, entire humanity cannot adulterate it, because it is pure, because it is based on truth. So this is what you are pursuing. You're pursuing something which is very pure, and you can do it only with pure intentions. Science is unstoppable. So it's like, as the popular adage goes, the only constant in life is change, right? So science is unstoppable. So there's one very beautiful characterization of science. So one scientist was, comparing science with religion, in the sense that religion depends a lot on authority, on books. Say, for instance, if I were to destroy all Qurans and all Bibles and kill everyone who knows Quran and Bible, no one can reproduce it, right? Because arguably it was given by a prophet or a god, and it took divine inspiration for it to be produced. But that's not the case with science. You kill every scientist alive today, you burn all the books, destroy everything, science will reproduce itself. We will invent a wheel, we will invent an engine, we will discover microorganisms, we will discover, no one can stop it. Why? Because it is dependent on observations and truth and facts, which never change. Regardless of who is observing it, sun will still rise in the east and set in the west. And regardless of who is observing it, the size of Earth is not going to change. It is a fact. Facts don't change. Because facts don't change, anyone who is pursuing the fact, his path has to be the same. By path, I mean, the ultimate path, not obviously, be it computer science, be it machine learning, be it anything, there are parallel multiple paths proceeding, but then eventually there's only one path, and that is the path of truth, and it is unstoppable, and science will reproduce it. And that's the beauty of science. So there have been many inventions which have been done parallelly. For instance, calculus was invented both by Newton as well as Laplace, I think. I'm not sure about the second name. He was a French mathematician. It was almost simultaneously done, and they were both unaware of each of them doing it. Same is the case with many discoveries or inventions made in India, as well as Europe and Arab countries, as well as in African countries. All of them happen to come almost at the same time. So why is that all these inventions or discoveries come at the same time? It's because we are always building the same institutional knowledge. So that is another beauty of what you are. You are going to be part of an institution, and you're going to stand on the shoulders of giants. You're going to say equations. You're going to write equations which were written by Newton and Einstein. You don't have to invent them. You don't have to discover them. You just have to move forward, right? They have done the hard work. Those hard works, and now you build on them. So you are always progressing forward. You are part of this grand institution, the institution called science, which has built the entire humanity. Science, or if I can say, we are the reason for human race starting with agriculture. We are the reason for building modern cities. We are the reason for building books. We are the reason for, so all these are significant turns in human history. We are the reason for developing internal combustion engines. We are the reason for developing computers and whatnot. So all this is through institutional knowledge. You are one more brick to this institution called science, and which is not small. You are at the same place where Einstein was. He also studied science. You are at the same place where anyone was, at the start of your career as a scientist. And science is transformative, in the sense that, I mean, you can equate it with Pandora's box, in the sense that once you open it, you cannot, it's like a genie, if you can say. Once unbottled, you cannot rebottle the genie. So it's transformative, right? Be it CRISPR technology, be it deep learning. Like, once the change comes in, it completely transforms everything. It's like when cement was invented, then the kind of buildings you were constructing were totally different, right? So science has this impact the effect of being transformative, and you are the agent of those transformations. The scientist is the agent of that transformation. And arguably, science is the only reality which exists, So what do I mean by reality? So scientifically speaking, a fact is something which is observed, okay? So for instance, it is a fact that it is bright now, right? It is not dark. So theory is that it is because of the sun, right? That is a theory, right? I mean, now you have to verify it, you have to reproduce it, you have to falsify it, you have to test it. I mean, I'm sure these are all jargons which don't make sense to you, but then philosophically, something is called scientific only if it is reproducible, it is testable, and it is falsifiable. So I'm sure you guys will learn this in your philosophy of science course, or what science is. But then the point I'm trying to make is that, say, economics is not science in pure sense. History is not science in pure sense. So I'm restricting my definition of science to be in this physical notion of science, where physics, chemistry, maths, and all the biology and all related fields come in the sense that it depends on facts and observations and experiments. It doesn't depend on human emotions. It doesn't depend on, so science cannot deal with psychology, for that matter, or it cannot deal with objective things, subjective things. It requires things to be objective, in the sense that it is either yes or no. I mean, it can be a spectrum like quantum physics or whatever it is, but then the point is, it doesn't require subjectivity or emotions to come in. So that's why I mean, science is arguably the only real thing which exists. And in some sense, scientists find non-scientific things to be very perplexing and hard to deal with. So you would observe that many scientists are introverts, they are antisocial, they make a very bad company to talk to. It's because they can't grasp the fact that everything is subjective. So for instance, when you talk to your friend and a friend says yes, it might mean no, whereas a scientist only listens to the word which is yes and the dictionary meaning of yes, and it is yes. So there was this very famous interview by Richard Dawkins, where the interviewer was like, Mr. Dawkins, how do you define success? And he was like, I don't define success. I take a dictionary and look at it. I don't define success. So I mean, the interview was perplexed. So was Richard Dawkins. He's a famous scientist, and I mean, that is the perspective of scientists. Things are simple when you keep it real, and in the realm of science, which is contrary to what people say. Maths is so tough, physics is so tough, chemistry is so tough, biology is so tough. I mean, nothing makes sense. Why is this? Why is that? But as a scientist, people would argue that it is the area of science and the field of science which is easy and makes sense. Everything else is, mumbo jumbo and black magic, and nothing makes sense. So yeah, so it is the only reality. So the point I'm trying to make is that you are entering a pure place. You're joining a force which is unstoppable. If I can, be very cheesy, you are joining the force itself, the force of Star Wars or whatever it is. And the force is always with you, and it is unstoppable. You can join the journey, you can enjoy the trip, but you have to be pure in yourself, in your own right. You have to be ethical. Your scientific ethics should be, paramount. You are part of this great institution of science, and you're going to transform the universe, right? So it is not a mean task. It's not a small thing. I mean, you have to actually grow up to that. And that's what hopefully your undergrad and masters, and if you choose PhD, would give you. So again, what is the character you should have as a researcher? When I say researcher, a scientist or a science student, whatever it is. So you should be impassionate. So what do I mean by impassionate? You are a scientist is essentially trained to fight bias. By bias, what do I mean is like, so there are, again, I'm sure you would learn this in your philosophy of science courses or, somewhere down the lane. So there are humans by nature are designed to have lots of biases, like hindsight bias, like confirmation bias, like tragedy of means, like curse of dimensionality. I mean, so these are all jargons. I don't intend to explain any of them. The point I'm trying to make is that you have to be like this judge who is only looking at the facts and proofs, and nothing is your baby, in the sense that, say, if I develop a theory, it is not my baby, it is just a theory, right? Now I have to verify whether it is correct or wrong. I cannot design experiments to ensure that it is correct. I cannot design experiments to ensure that someone else's theory is wrong, right? So that disconnection which you have from your own theories or your own subjects is what is required. You should not have passion, in the sense that you should have passion for science and knowledge, but you should not be passionate about a concept or an idea, in the sense that you should be ready to throw it whenever someone proves it to be wrong, right? So essentially, you should be critical, right? You only look at facts, you only look at observations, and you try to connect it, right? You do nothing else affects you. It is not your emotions, it's not your feelings, it's not your standing of your country. It is nothing. If it is wrong, it is wrong. So, for instance, if it turns out that the vaccines were actually causing autism, we as scientists will stand up and say that what we did was wrong. So that is one of the beauties of science, unlike religion, where scientists actually come forward to you and tell you that, what we thought was wrong. Initially, we told you don't wear a mask. Now we are telling you wear a mask, please. That's how we stop. We were wrong. We didn't wear mask initially. Now we are wearing mask. Please correct yourself. So there is no agenda behind what you do, right? In the sense that a false agenda. There's no propaganda. You're ready to, falsify yourself. There's this very famous case of this mathematician called Frege, I guess. I'm not very sure about pronouncing his name. But then the point is, he was writing a very big book, which was a collection of his entire work. He's basically a mathematical logician. It is at that time a young mathematician called Gödel came up with this theorem called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So this, I cannot emphasize it enough. It suffices to say that this is literally designated as the theorem of the century, that is 1900 to 2000, theorem of the century. I mean, this completely changed how maths behaves. I mean, this was one of the major contributions after Cantor's contribution in maths, Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It completely shook the area of mathematical logic and formal mathematics. There was this formalism movement which was going on. So Frege at that time was about to publish this book when this theorem came out, which totally falsified everything which he's arguing in the book. And he canceled the publication of the book. It didn't matter to him whether, the amount of effort he put in. He just canceled the publication, but the publisher went on to publish the book. That's a different argument. But the point is, he was not connected with the work. He was only connected with the truth, and he only wanted truth to come out, right? And above all, a scientist is philosophical. He's always thinking, he's always arguing, he's always asking questions. He has to think the long-term effects of the inventions or discoveries he's making. For instance, deep learning, what are the long-term impacts of that? Social media, what is the long-term impact of that? Social media was not a scientific invention, it was an engineering invention by a group of companies like Orkut and Facebook and MySpace. Scientists have nothing to do with it. They screwed it up, not us. So yeah, so philosophical. I mean, you always have to think beyond, for that you should be able to connect with the entire universe as a whole. And other thing is, scientists is tenacious. I mean, it's a marathon. You just fail most of the times. If I can speak for myself, I would say that 90% of all my experiments fail. 10% is a very optimum number I'm putting. I would even argue 95% of all my experiments fail. And if I were to stop with each failure, I would not be doing anything in my life. So, that's what a life of a scientist is. I mean, it's a series of failure followed by a few major inventions or discoveries. But then if you're able to enjoy the game, it's like playing sports. I mean, I wouldn't know how better to put it. Like, I play badminton a lot. I play squash a lot. I play football a lot, and I'm bad at all of it. I'm not good at any of it. Most of the time I lose, but I enjoy it. I am most of the times the guy who organizes these games and participates in them. I enjoy the whole process of playing it. Playing is for the sake of playing. Same is the case with science. You should be tenacious. You don't care if you fail or succeed. It's that you enjoy it. You enjoy the process of experiments. And just to put things in perspective, scientist is not an engineer. So this captures what is the difference between a scientist and an engineer. Scientist is elegant. He wants to know the fact. He wants to know how things work and how they don't work. Engineer doesn't care about it. He just wants things to work. For example, sellotape is arguably the most important tool used by astronauts, just because it works all the time. Something is broken, they connect it with sellotape. Sellotapes is like this universal thing which will engineer everything. A scientist is never satisfied. Scientist is elegant. Scientist is beautiful. Scientist is perfect. Not an engineer. Engineer only cares about making things work. Scientist doesn't care. That's why social network would never be produced by a scientist. Only engineer can produce it. So yeah, I mean, I hate social networks. So yeah. So to conclude, we are back to where we started. Like, what is science? So now, if I were to say, science is actually an intellectual and practical activity. I mean, I hope you can appreciate that it is an intellectual activity. I mean, you see things, right? It's your brain which is constantly working. I mean, you are perpetually young. If you interact with any scientist, I mean, on an average, you would see that they're very energetic and they're very young. They think fast. It's because they are always thinking. Their brain is constantly working, and it's beyond the beauty. I mean, there is obviously the training part of it, right? I mean, you can't just become a scientist because of your passion. You have to train for it. You have to ensure that what you do is actually right and scientifically precise. So that requires a systemic study, right? But what are you studying? What are you looking at? You're looking at the behavior of this world, right? You're looking at the physics. You're looking at the entire world. I mean, for you now, everything is talking back to you, right? It is a poem which is going around in the entire universe. You're just tuning yourself to listen to it. I tune myself to computer science. You might tune yourself to chemistry. Someone else might tune themselves to physics. And given the nature of the world, now everything is interdisciplinary. For instance, I work with political scientists. I work with lawyers. I work with people from chemistry. So it is. I just cannot put it in words. Like, what are you playing with? So once things start opening up to you, even sky is not your limit, right? Sky is just the starting point, I would say. Like Elon Musk, for instance, he wants to go to Mars, but obviously Mars is not the limit. I mean, once you start going there, then you can go anywhere, right? So yeah, so that is what science is. So just to put something formal here. So how your career would look like is like, you might end up in academics, or you might end up in a research lab, which is arguably very good, or you be consultants, right? So and again, I mean, if you were to pursue PhD is never a degree. Anyone who asks me whether I should do a PhD, my default answer is no, because the very thing that you had such a question means that it is not for you, right? It's like buying a yacht. If you were to ask what is the price of a yacht, the answer is it's not for you. So PhD degree is not for someone who looks at it as a degree, but it is only for someone who wants to live their entire life in science. But then, as I said, you are part of this major institution called science, and given that now science is under attack from all these, Trumpist kind of people who do not believe in science. You not believing in science is not believing in facts, right? Science doesn't create facts. Science only observes facts. So you as a part of this institution, the grand institution of science, are arguably going to defend it. And you need not take up any scientific positions, but the very fact that your thought process is scientific would mean that your decisions would be scientific, your voting choices would be scientific, your any decisions you make in your life, be it personal or be it social, would be scientific. So that's what you have to strive for. And so again, so it's not a career, it's your life. So things you learn from here is going to decide how you want to look at your life and the perspective of your life. So if you choose to take a path to PhD, I would argue that after graduation should take up a job. So this is more from an engineer perspective. For a BSc, maybe you don't want to take up a job, you can directly go to a post graduation. But then after that, I would argue that you take up a job. By job, I mean something, say, technical, something in some job in a lab, or maybe even a factory where you actually work with things. Because what happens is, like, PhD, as they argue, is a life in ivory tower. You are totally secluded from the entire world. For instance, when I was in IIT Madras, it was one of the best places to be, but Madras as a city is not a great place to be. So the point I'm trying to make is, like, you are always in this oasis which is kept to you, and you're in an utopian world where everything works, everything is idealized, everything is perfect. So what happens is, like, your worldview and your perspective towards life also is very much skewed, and you can't ask practical questions in your scientific endeavor. So I always encourage people to take up a job before taking a PhD, because that also gives you a perspective, whether you actually want to do a PhD, because PhD is not a job, right? I mean, you can't earn a lot of money from it. It is a way of living. So maybe you enjoy your job. I mean, I have quite a few friends who are very good in their science and scientific methodology, but then they didn't want to take a PhD. They wanted to work, and they enjoy their work, and that's where they are, and that's where here's where I am, and both of us are equally good. So yeah, so be brave, and don't limit yourself to institutes which are around you. Go beyond. For me, I wouldn't have been a scientist if I hadn't gone to IISc, because IISc is an amazing place to be. Over there, during my time, MTechs, I mean, there was no undergrad at that time, now there is, but then everyone was a PhD. I mean, you randomly look at anyone, he's a PhD, right? He or she is a PhD, and they only talk about research, they only talk about scientists, they only talk about these things. Science is only thing you hear. In IISc, you actually meet Nobel laureates. You actually know people, the kind of research they did, the kind of profound effects they had. They share their aha moments with you. They share their inspirations with you. I mean, that you need role models to aspire to, right? So yeah, you should go to these institutes. I mean, these are just institutes I listed in India. Obviously, these are not comprehensive. There are quite a few other institutes like CSIRs, institutes, and obviously you should also go out of India, be it MIT, Harvard, Stanford. Again, from a computer science perspective, I'm sure for science, there are equally good institutes from a different perspective. So yeah, so please do enjoy your journey, and 3 years would be over before you know it. So, I don't learn anything, but understand everything, and exams don't matter. If you understand that marks are secondary and it's a side effect, it will come. So yeah, enjoy yourself is all I have to say. Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, I think
Sir, can we go for question and answer session? Can we
Sure.
spend some time?
I can do that.
Dear students, please have your doubts here. If anything you want to know more, you can ask here now.
You can either unmute and ask, or you can put your question in the chat box.
Cool. I guess everyone is very motivated now, and they have no questions. They just want to start off with the science, I guess. So, yeah.
I think that's the problem that we are always facing in the class. No one will have questions. Only if I think some of the students will come forward and ask you. Even I have lot of questions, but
yeah, no, it's not a problem. Not that it's a problem. So that's one very good thing which happened to me, that I'm like, my brother and I have 7.5 years of age gap, and so he obviously was way ahead of me. So I used to have these hundreds of questions which I constantly used to ask him, and he was a lovely guy in the sense that he never bugged me off, or he totally encouraged it. So the scientists at the end of the day are people who are asking the right questions, right? So your ability to ask questions primarily depends on your ability to be not shy, and to be to be confident enough that you are not foolish, in the sense that no question is foolish. So for instance, if I were to ask you what is the color of sky, I mean, it might seem foolish, but then the answer to that is very profound. Or say something as trivial as why is glass transparent, you'll be surprised that the answer to why glass is transparent is not that glass is transparent, but the question should be, why is that most of the other things are not transparent? So things like that. I mean, so this also happened to me when I was in class 6. So what happened is, like, one of our subjects, SUPW, so it's socially useful and productive.
yes. Yeah, right.
So we used to call it some useful period being wasted. So SUPW, there was no teacher for us, so it was assigned to our science teacher. So she would come there and she would not teach us anything, and she would just sit there and say, you can ask me anything. So for 1 year we had a blast of a time. Like, there were 40 students, everyone had so many questions. Like, what is sand, what happens when you bury a body, why is there wind, why is there a lightning, and this was totally beyond the scope of the syllabus, right? So this was amazing experience, in the sense that it totally opened up your perspective towards what you're learning. Because when you're say constrained by a syllabus, you always have to finish it in time, right? Now the teacher doesn't have any constraints to finish their teaching. I mean, they could talk about anything, right? So it was amazing. So having my brother and having this teacher was amazing. So like, I'm arguably the tallest guy in my class, but then I always sit in the front bench. It doesn't matter whether the person behind me can see it or not. I want to sit in the front bench. I want to talk to the teacher. So even during my PhD, even during my masters, even during my undergrads, I used to constantly talk to the teachers, and it was amazing, constantly talking to them. So at a point, it so happens that they only talk back to you, and you are the one who is driving the course. So it's amazing how much you can learn just by conversing with the teachers. So again, let me share experience with the kids. Finding good students is very tough for a good teacher. And when a good teacher finds a good students, they totally enjoy it, right? So the worst experience as a teacher you can have is having a class which is not interested. So even if one student shows interest, the teacher is, reciprocates it beyond anything, which I have done myself and I have experienced myself. There have been many cases where a teacher was arguably supposed to be a very bad teacher, but I experienced otherwise. He was very good. And there have been experiences where I wanted to teach something, and say as a PhD student, you also take classes in for undergrads, and undergrads were, they were never interested, and you totally lose your energy. The moment you start and you see that no one is interested, you lose your energy. So I would encourage you guys to always have a conversation with your teachers, not that you bug everything, and but then always chat with them during the class. So yeah, so those are actually very helpful for me. Yeah. So yeah. So
Yes, any questions?
Sir, can I ask something?
yeah, you
Yes.
can.
Okay. I'm Shahma Maria and I'm doing physics in KMM. I'm personally a person who always want to do different things at a time, and I don't want to constrict myself in doing a single thing. Now I got an internship at Anti-Corona Task Force recently,
Okay.
and my parents and everybody around me is like, why should you do it? You are doing your bachelor's, oh, you should concentrate in that. Why should you do it together? You will loosen something. But I don't want to constrict myself. I have class 3 years, three hours a day, but
Okay.
then I have 24 hours a day, and why should I constrict myself in studying just over my degrees? So
Yeah.
if I can complete my internship, it's always an asset for me.
Yeah.
So how? So I just want to know your opinion about me doing this internship.
Okay. So I personally don't know what is the scope of your internship, so I would not specifically answer that. But then, I would argue that, say, in my experience, so what happens is like beyond the level, uh, say for instance, I'm currently applying for faculty positions in, say, IITs. Okay. So everyone who applies to a faculty position in IIT is equally qualified. So now, how do you distinguish yourself, right? In the sense that everyone has a PhD, obviously, everyone has lots of papers, everyone has, so for instance, when I was in IISc, everyone was rank 1, rank 2, rank 4, rank 5, there was no distinction between anyone in the class. So how do you distinguish yourself? So it is your worldview and experience which ultimately would distinguish yourself. And again, I don't know about this particular internship, but then as it sounds very exciting and challenging, I mean, the experience you gather there is something which is unique to you, right? None of your competitors would have it. So for instance, when you go for an interview or for a higher studies, none of your competitors will have it. So I mean, this is a very bad thing about Indian education system. But then say if you apply for a master's in US, apart from your marks, which is the grade sheet, they would actually ask for an essay or a summary of your achievements. And this is what they're looking for. They're not saying, okay, I studied till class 10, then class 12, then graduation. No, they are looking at what were the other things you did. Were you part of some sports team? Were you part of some, voluntary organizations? Were you doing some internship so things which you did not have to do, but you did, right? So any experience is good, right? So yeah, but then given the Indian context, even if people say that marks are not important, at the end of the day marks are very important. So at least in India, so anything which doesn't compromise on your marks, you should do. And believe me, as a youngster, you have the energy and time to do whatever you want. Now I have lots of plans and lots of ideas, and I don't have the energy or the time to do anything. So I have so much of other work to do that things which I'm passionate about, I'm not able to do. So you should actually exploit every second you have as an undergrad and even as a master student. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And you asked, no, what moved me to this internship is that I opted for physics only because my parents were very conservative and I always wanted to go for a computer science field. And I didn't have a good college having this course. So I opted for physics because I have computer science is complementary so that I can move to I could do my master's in computer science.
Yeah.
So that's what moved me to this internship because I'm doing it in the field of computer science. I opted for a small course when I was in the lockdown. I went on doing an online course in computer science, cybersecurity, and all because I was always interested in computer science.
Yeah. So that's actually very good, and so other thing is like, again, I will emphasize from computer science perspective, computer science is a field which was derived from mathematics, and lots of initial contributions came from physics actually. So there is a topic called theory of computation and all those things. So lots of those things came from physics. So actually physicists have a lot to contribute in computer science. And many of the research which goes on now is interdisciplinary. So many of the professors which I had actually had an undergrad or a master's in maths or physics or things like that. So, you know, so given the interdisciplinary nature of research which goes on now, your undergrad is not very important in the sense that it is not constraining. It's not as if you can only work in physics. You can always move on to other fields. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So I guess that should be it. I have to make a move now. And yeah, so thanks for your time.
We can wind up the session with a presentation of our vote of thanks. Sahir sir, can I proceed with vote of thanks?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he's Jitin is busy now.
Yeah, right, sir. Within a few minutes, I will stop. Dear friends, we had a very nice session in my view. I think you all benefited out of that. Dr. Jitin, actually, you put science in right perspective, I should say. And from that perspective, we could see science as more beautiful, more close to our hearts, actually, not to our brains, more close to our hearts than to our brain, and simpler than what we generally feel about it. On behalf of Parent Teachers Association of Krishna Menon Memorial Government Women's College, Kannur, I extend our sincere gratitude to you, sir. Thank you. Also, I have to be thankful to Fatima teacher for delivering the presidential address, and also to Sahir sir for giving me all the technical support, and also for identifying a right person for today's induction program. Thank you, Sahir sir. Also, I am thankful to Shahul sir for delivering the welcome address. I thank all faculty members of the science department who joined with us for today's session. And also, dear students, be reminded of romanticizing what Jitin sir has rightly coined it, romanticizing. Also, fooling around. Science is nothing but fooling around. And also, be kids to be a true scientist. You should take away something from today's session, because there are many things which have to be taken back to home. So you start loving science and be true scientists. That's what our society demands out of you. So thanks for your patient listening. Thank you all. So we are winding up the session. Once again, thank you, Jitin sir. Over to Sahir sir, if you have anything.
Thank you, sir. I think one of the students can come forward and say their feedback, right? That would be much better.
Yeah, that's also good. Yeah.
Please, one of you come forward. Drishya. No one? It seems then we can wind up, right? That was an amazing session, actually, Jitin. Thank you very much for your time.